This is episode number 4 of the Feed Me, Fuel Me podcast. Welcome to the Feed Me, Fuel Me podcast. My name is Jeff Thornton, tech entrepreneur and fitness enthusiast, alongside my co-hosts Michael Anders and Jason Sani. Each week we bring you an inspiring person or message related to our 4 pillars of success: manifestation, business, fitness, and nutrition. Thank you for allowing us to join you on your journey. Now let's begin.
What's up? Episode 4, rolling. Feed Me, Fuel Me podcast. Coach Durr is here. Jeff, Jason, what's good, boys?
What up?
Today we're going to talk about the elephant in the room, nutrition. I'm going to ask Jason a lot of controversial questions.
Bring it on.
But because this is his area of expertise, but I mean the bedrock of what we're going to talk about today is macronutrients and keeping nutrition as simple as possible. Because I think we would all agree that it's not as complicated as people make it out to be.
That's the truth.
Yeah. So
we can shine some light on that.
Sure. I guess my first question to you, bro, though, is how do you approach nutrition at a macro level? Like, what's the stuff that applies to everybody before you really start diving into individual plans? Like, what's the stuff that people need to have no matter what their goals are?
So you want to break down my philosophy is eating based on your demand. And I don't want to say it's my philosophy, it's just a general philosophy of nutrition, and you can make variables based on activity and so on. So if you look at the basic 3 of macronutrients of protein, carbohydrates, and fat, that's where you're going to get your calories one way or another. And so when you can let people know that you don't necessarily have to obsess over counting them, but if you're eating 2,000 calories or 3,000 calories, you're getting them from a macronutrient. And I think that can make a shift in people's head that most people on average are eating around 2,000 calories without even thinking about it. And, that's just a total average number that you see, like when you see your daily values of things and so on. So that being said, it's just letting people know that you want to get ideally a healthy percentage, we'll say just 30 to 40% from protein, which is the building block of life. So you have amino acids that are going to help fuel cognitive function to your metabolism, your nervous system. And then from there, depending on your activity levels and preferences based on how your hormones are, that's where you'd split up the rest with carbohydrates and fat. So you don't necessarily have to say you need a gram of protein per pound of body weight, which is really common. So like a 200-pound guy would eat 200 grams of protein. It doesn't have to be that strict. That's just kind of a benchmark for if you're active, that's going to provide you with kind of that enough value. I like to tell people, the bare minimum. So, for a male, it's been shown that you need around, at a minimum, about 60, 70 grams of protein one way or another to be able to get by a steady, active lifestyle. With a female, probably still same thing, about 60 grams or more. So from there, when it comes to carbohydrates and fat, based on activity and what you're trying to do, and that's where it's going to be the big basics. So just being aware, if I can get people to get their protein, at that minimum mark of, we'll say 60, 70 grams, that's just, we'll say 3 portions of protein. So look at your palm-sized portion of protein. That's the bare minimum. And then if you're active and it's something that you want to track, you can start improving it. From there, go with quality of food. So without obsessing over it, that first step is just get nutrient-dense foods. So that's foods that come from soil that can have vitamins and minerals or so on. That's step 1, I feel like, and that it can make a major difference for people just being aware of that, because protein is going to help with satiety and keep you satisfied. It's going to help with brain function and energy, metabolism. Those are the basics.
Why do people struggle with nutrition? It's been my experience. I'm sure, Jeff, you can attest to this as well as you make that shift, in a more extreme sense, to dialing it in for a bodybuilding competition, the do without mentality to get shredded, to deplete, to be as lean as possible. I feel like the fear of unknown, or the fear that is a byproduct of ignorance, is what really hinders people from really taking on nutrition, because it's such an element of fitness that happens behind closed doors for the most part. Everybody works out. There's videos all over the place of, people training and doing the fitness part, but they say gains are made in the kitchen, but you don't, unless it's somebody promoting a cookbook or they're already ripped and this is what I eat. There's really nothing out there that's readily accessible to people that really lets them know that it's not challenging. So like, where does the struggle really come from?
The whole realm just needs to be simplified. I think that because of marketing hype, it's you have companies with ulterior motives, whether it's protein companies or breakfast companies saying you need to eat a certain amount of meals or the timing of meals. Like it's all with people trying to promote and sell some sort of like shortcut or easier way to go about things. But in reality, it's consistency. I think that your body's going to go into a survival mode and do different mechanisms if it goes without food for too long. And one of the most common things that happens is your metabolism is going to down-regulate or up-regulate based on what you're doing consistently. And that's where you have to look at your nutrition more than just what you're eating on a daily basis. You have to think about, like, what are you generally doing? So just maybe take a week in general. Like, those averages are going to work out for the most part. But it gets complicated because we see so many gimmicks of buying protein supplements and different propaganda, basically, to be able to, to sell something. Mm-hmm. And people just really need to stick to consistency. If you just break down like that consistent value of you getting a basic amount of protein, which we'll say to simplify this, a half to 1 gram to start out. So per pound of body weight. So if you weigh 200 pounds, get 100 grams to 200 grams, closer to the 200 grams if you're more active or you feel like you're doing more, bodybuilding breakdown of muscle tissue. And then from there, you're going to find where your carbohydrates are. Let's just start with fat, though. Let's say your body needs roughly around like a minimum of 50 grams of fat. They've shown for hormone support and vitamin absorption. It helps support your blood sugar. And then you're going to fill the rest of those calories with carbohydrates. But what happens is we see people say go low carb, go low fat. All this like hype is going around crazy. And the thing that I think confuses people is people do see success going low carb, going keto and so on, and it's a big thing. Or then you see people that are doing a macro-based plan where they're following a set number of macronutrients, and they find success with that. So I think there's a lot of confusion that there's no definitive exact way of style of eating with timing and so on, but it comes down to finding what works for you consistently.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So, Jeff, when you got on stage, did you weigh your food, count your macros? Like, how meticulous were you with your nutrition?
Starting out, I didn't count anything. I had a guy I trained with who gave me basically the typical boilerplate diet, mm-hmm. boiled chicken, broccoli, things like that. And I followed that regimen, and as you got closer to the show, you continue to eat less and less of that, right? But by the time I did my shows, when I was doing everything myself, I was weighing everything from morning to night every single day. Mm-hmm. And I found that process helped me as far as understanding portion size better, whether it's like how many grams or whatever I'm getting of food. But it gave me a better understanding of how food works, like the macronutrient portion of mm-hmm. it, how much protein, fats, and carbs I was getting, instead of just going on like a bodybuilding.com and saying, oh, Lee Labrada eats 300 grams of protein. I got to eat that to look like that. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So I found out how my body worked a little bit better with my calories, because some people are more carb sensitive. Some people, are carb insensitive where they can eat a crap load of carbs. Mm-hmm. But so that's what I did. But now, even to this day, I still measure. I find it just keeps me on point. And it's not that I have to measure. It's just an enjoyable thing to do just to see where I'm at.
So that's become part of your process.
Yeah.
It's in you now.
Yeah, it's in me. It's okay. It doesn't take a lot of time to weigh food. I think people sort of look at that concept when when they're starting out, it's like, I don't have that amount of time to weigh food every day. I have this to do. It only takes 5 more seconds to, throw something on the scale for me.
Okay.
And I think it does for anybody else. It's just actually setting aside that priority for you.
Mm-hmm. See, I'm the exact opposite.
Mhm.
Like I watch my wife weigh everything, and to me, it's an added stressor.
Yep.
And knowing that about myself, I try to, really drive nutrition from a principle-based standpoint, from a macronutrient standpoint, protein, carbs, and fat, and, lean protein, leafy green vegetables, and trying to make your plate as colorful as possible, and just use these very, very broad stroke principles, and then not overdoing it from an intake standpoint has really kept me sane in the nutrition process. I mean, I've done 4 bodybuilding competitions and never weighed an ounce of food. And I think the message here, though, is you have to find what works best for you in your process and matches your personality type. Because I think some people thrive on the details and other people get lost in the details. But the only way you're going to figure out which camp you live in is to experiment.
Yep.
And because to me, I enjoy food so much, like weighing it and being, diving into the weeds of it all would probably just ruin the whole experience of eating for me. So that's where I sit, but I've still been extremely successful in, with nutrition and what it's done for me, my body, and my performance. So there's definitely multiple ways to do it. And one thing I want to touch on is going back to a previous point that you made, Jason, was the elimination of it all without having to dissect one nutrition protocol versus another. But, in your expert opinion, describe for people what happens when you eliminate or extremely decrease one macronutrient in favor of another. Like, why is it detrimental to you over the long term to go low carb or low fat? What happens metabolically when you do that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. So there's a requirement for all the macronutrients, and some people will argue that you don't need carbohydrates all the time because your body's going to convert things into glucose, which is sugar that it goes into your blood sugar that your body uses for energy one way or another. So through different processes, your body can turn different types of fats and proteins into that energy, but it's not an efficient type of process. When you remove one of the major groups, so protein, fat, or carbohydrate, for example, we'll just start with carbohydrate, that removes your body's preferred source for fuel. The easiest source to use is glucose. So when you eat a carbohydrate, it turns into a form of sugar. Let's just think about, milk is lactose, anything with ose, fructose, glucose, sucrose, and then, all those are different portions of sugars that are going to be broken down into your body. When you remove that, your body has to seek another fuel source. And so if you become adapted to something, your body can learn to break down fats, but it's not an easy process, and you literally have to not eat any sort of carbohydrates in order for your body to get into that process. And so you'll have a little bit of a brain fog because your brain is used to using a certain type of, so you notice there's an energy deficiency and something like that. And when you remove fat has a lot of satiety, which keeps your body satisfied and so on. You remove fat, which is also responsible for regulating, your blood sugar somewhat, and vitamin absorption. There's vitamins and minerals that are fat soluble. A lot of the colorful things like vitamin A, D, E, and K all require a fat to be able to, for them to be able to dissolve and to carry it to your bloodstream. Otherwise, they're destroyed in your stomach acid and so on. So that's another reason why if you're drinking like fruit juices or you're on cleanses, like a fat is absolutely essential. Think of the Mediterranean diet that has olive oil and so on. It's, it's not random that is there to absorb like the salads and all the vegetables and so on. So if you remove fat, you're not going to be able to absorb everything. Your satiety isn't going to be there as much. You'll notice that fat is what makes food taste good, and taste good is that like satiety. You remove protein, and that's another big factor in satiety, but that's amino acids. So your decision making, your metabolism. You have to think what amino acids are. Things like tryptophan, which, when it's paired up with some things, can give you cognitive function and energy. When it's paired up with other things, it makes you tired. Think about like tryptophan with turkey and so on. And you have tyrosine, which is another energy amino acid. And then you have your building blocks like leucine, which is definitely the most abundant amino acids that's responsible for protein synthesis. And just think of that as like new muscle tissue being created. Without that, your body doesn't have the right signals to go into like the rebuilding of muscle tissue. Where this is a huge factor is for metabolism purposes, the more lean mass you have, meaning more muscle mass you have, your metabolic rate will be higher. So if you're not feeding your muscle mass, your body doesn't know better and it will eat away at muscle, and therefore your body composition is going to be less favorable, and that slows down your metabolism and it slows down energy function and so on. So those are the basics of the importance of those. And when you eliminate one of them, it's just an extreme. So it's like, there's no diet that should eliminate any one of those specific sources.
Sure. And that's a big point in that they all work together somehow, some way to create an optimal system. And when you manipulate the ratios in an extreme fashion, something in that optimal chain comes up short. So no matter what, even though you might be achieving an aesthetic result that you were looking for, you're still not as efficient as you could or should be. And I don't think people understand that. When you look at like the extremes of nutrition and dieting, it's a very short term, in the span of your life.
Sure.
Those nutritional extremes are very short lived. When we're talking about bodybuilding or preparing for an ultra race or anything that requires, some kind of extreme deficit or rapid shifting of macronutrient ratios to drive aesthetics or performance, you're looking at, 10 to 16 weeks of preparation. The event happens, and then, for normal people, life goes back to normal, right? For extreme athletes or habitual competitors, it's not a sustainable lifestyle. And I don't think people really understand like the short windows that like magazine models and stuff like that deplete for.
Yeah.
And then, the eventually, soon after the photo shoot or the event or whatever, the ratios come back to some kind of homeostasis, and then
a set point, something.
Right.
Yeah. So, that's something definitely to keep in mind, that what works for one person or works for another, you never know if how their metabolism is or how they function, or if they're prepping up for something or so on. And realize that most of those people on covers, that is like that for a short period of time. And sometimes when people look their best, they're actually at their least healthiest, which we've touched on this before. So, just as somebody preps, what makes a prep so successful is somebody, let's say 12 weeks out or 10 weeks out, is trying to diet down and get ready for something, which is powerful to do for somebody, whether you want to do a photo shoot or just look good to go to the beach or whatever. It gives you a deadline and a goal to hold yourself a little bit accountable. Mm-hmm. And so you can see the power. And I can, both of you guys from being in shows, but can realize after doing that first one, you see the value in picking a target date and just tracking something. Maybe it was annoying, but if you can shift that annoying or overwhelming feeling to kind of exciting and tracking it and gaining knowledge and understanding, you can have fun with this. But what that is you tracking for a period, let's say 10 weeks out or whatever, is you now are going to be consistent with something for a period of time. And, I can say the same thing. I've less than 1% of my food do I measure. I go through short periods of time occasionally just to make sure that, like, if I'm eating a new food group, I'll look at the portions, and so I can eyeball it and give advice to people that say, your palm-sized portion is roughly 25 grams of protein, or a pound of protein is roughly 100 grams, give or take. You split that in four portions of 25. There's an example there. But by doing that for a period of time, you become aware, and that can put that on autopilot. But then it's consistency. You know that, okay, you're going to eat 3 or 4 meals per day that are at these amounts. that is what gives you those changes. And I think what people are doing on a daily basis is just they're going out and playing kind of a guessing game or just kind of going with the flow, and they eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and they might be legitimately missing a full macronutrient group without even thinking about it. It's common. A lot of people go out to lunch and not even think to add a protein portion of whatever else they're eating, or they'll have dinner and have like salad or something and not eat that protein. So what that does is for that portion or period of time, they're overloaded with that type of macronutrient, carbohydrates or whatever that give you a big energy load, and you might not need all that energy. And this is what's happening with the inconsistency. On a daily basis, your body's not used to what type of energy source that it's using. So it just says, hey, it's easier to down-regulate your metabolism and kind of look at things more of like almost a survival instinct that I don't know when things are going to be consistent, so I'm going to hold on to different things. Mm-hmm. So I hope that makes sense a little bit. That's why people get a lot of results is they track something. And there's so much value in measuring your food for a couple days or doing a food journal and looking up the food groups. Yeah, it might seem like, but now there's so many resources for us, but it might seem a little overwhelming to see how much protein or carbohydrates or fat are in things. But let that work in your favor. Maybe only eat 3 meals that day and make sure you track everything. And that way at the end of the day, you know what you did. And then you can say, how do I feel this day? And that makes it easier to make your changes.
Right. Mm-hmm. So nutrition is what you do on a professional level day in, day out. Jeff, to Jason's point about consistency and, your prep for the stage and having done the whole bodybuilding thing and since competing in a handful of CrossFit competitions, as you've made that shift, how does the consistency carry over when you're not in that competition mode?
It stays the same for me pretty much throughout, because there's not a lot that I switch up when it comes to my routine, my nutrition plan, because I'm at a point to where I know what a maintenance phase looks like for my body.
Sure.
And how I feel energy levels. And if I need to cut, I know what that takes or bulk or whatever. But it's pretty much at a consistent level for me on all levels now, because I understand what it takes from a food perspective to get me to where I need to be. And I understand how my body feels at this point to where, okay, I know I'm deficient in these areas, so I need to start picking some of these other sources up, whether it be, the fiber in my food or, more micronutrients as far as vegetables and things like that. So, yeah, right now that's pretty consistent for me. What about yourself?
So, for me, I like to call it the instinctual approach because, it's very, it forces me to be in tune with how I feel mm-hmm. and how I perform. So, I know from one day to the next, I'm very in tune with what I eat and how much of it I've taken in, and based on that, I try to correlate how I perform in workouts and how I look in the mirror, and then I make that shift macronutritionally, if that's even a word, to achieve a desired result. So having gone through the process of bodybuilding really helped me understand how food works and what food does. And now I just apply those principles to a less extreme standpoint of, if I didn't get a whole lot of carbs and then this workout didn't go so well, or if we're in a strength phase at the gym, that's a different nutritional requirement than being in a conditioning phase and having, day in, day out, 20 to 30 minute WODs versus, 30 to 40 minutes of strength with, very concentrated periods of effort immediately followed by longer breaks, so the nutritional demands to perform optimally, depending on those different kinds of workouts, that really determines how I eat and when I eat.
And I want to simplify this because, sometimes just understanding why you eat what you eat can be overwhelming. Let's just lay this out really clearly. The physical activity that you do on a daily basis is going to make a difference on how your body uses calories and the types of food. Okay, so for instance, if by doing high activity, as you were saying,
Right.
your body is going to utilize carbohydrates and potentially store them in your muscles rather than them being stored in fat cells. From an energy perspective, if you eat more energy than your body is using, your body's going to look for somewhere to store it. And if your muscles are not in a demand for it, it's going to get turned into triglycerides in a lot of cases. It's temporary energy, and if you don't use that, that's where it can convert to, fat, even fruit, and so on. So I want to add to, we have to think that food is information. It's not just fuel. Everybody says food is fuel, food is fuel. Carbohydrate or different types of sugars on one person can have a complete different type of reaction and tell your body to do one thing or another. So that being said, fruit, for example, it is a carbohydrate, but fructose, for some people, are extremely sensitive to that or insensitive to that, to where when they eat fruit, it gets formed and turned into triglycerides. So literally fruit can get turned into fat because it goes into your liver, and your liver cannot, blood sugar goes up, but insulin doesn't come down to lower it, and so it's floating around and it doesn't go into your bloodstream as fast, and your body isn't able to use it, so it gets turned into triglycerides a lot of times. So that's why when it comes to carbohydrates, not all carbohydrates are bad. You just have to realize that the best forms of carbohydrates are vegetables and fibrous carbohydrates, things that actually have fiber, which is important, which kind of sneaks in the macronutrient profile, which you want to get about 30 grams, so say 25 to 35 grams per day. If you don't know how much that is, look it up and realize that, like an avocado maybe has 8 to 10 grams of fiber, or nuts and seeds have fiber, or serving of oatmeal has fiber, or fibrous vegetables. But understand that the different types of carbohydrates are going to have a different reaction. Some of them are going to dump energy into your blood system right away, but the fibrous carbohydrates will give you a slower release. And that's important to know, whether you're trying to refuel your muscles right away or you're just trying to set yourself up with sustained energy.
And really quickly too, since we're discussing proteins, carbs, and fats, I know it may be simple to us to understand what each of those groups are, but can you quickly explain to people, because we hear it all the time, what exactly is protein, what is a carb, what is a fat, and from a food perspective? So if people want to up their protein, what should they eat? Or carbs, what should they eat for carbs?
I'll touch it. So, the most common proteins that people are going to look at are things like, meat and chicken and beef and fish and eggs. But you also have to realize that there's a lot of, I've been plant-based. I tried that out for about a year, and that there's protein in peas and legumes like beans and seeds and nuts. So, there's a lot of plant-based forms of protein as well. So, most meals should be built around some sort of protein source. So just think about, a substance, whether it's an animal type of protein or like a beans, chickpeas, something like that. Carbohydrates are going to be any sort of like plant or something that comes from the ground is going to have some source of carbohydrates in it, or starches. So think about breads or rices or potatoes, or, those are going to be forms of carbohydrates. We can go into good and bad. There's not necessarily a good or bad one. It just depends on when your body needs that fuel. And then fat, think of the most common ones are oils and like seeds and nut oils, things like coconut, you got avocado, you have, there's some saturated fat in animal products and things like that can be beneficial, and eggs and so on, but they all, play a role. So those are your main sources. Does that answer?
Yeah, that's perfect.
To get even more basic than that, something that really solidified the whole thing for me at the most basic level. There's obviously more detail involved if you really want to dive into it. But something I live by is, if it walks, swims, or flies, it's a protein.
Yeah.
And if it comes out of the dirt, it's a carbohydrate. And then you can find fats in both those sources.
Yeah.
Red meat has a higher concentration of fat than fish, or even salmon for that matter, have higher concentrations of saturated fats than lean chicken or tuna or something like that. And then you can obviously pull fats out of olive oils and coconut oils and stuff like that, and use those as stuff in your food to make it taste better, but also increase your caloric intake if need be, in a very subtle, non-invasive way, without having to eat a whole lot more. Really kind of helps drive home the process. But at the most basic level, that's what did it for me. I was like,
Yeah.
okay. So when I look at a plate, I'm like, okay, I'm doing all the right things based on that criteria.
Yeah. And another way to look at it, you can think about, let's say talk about looking at your plate. If you look at a typical plate, say breakfast, lunch, or dinner, think about drawing a T on it. Above that flat line should ideally be vegetables or some sort of leafy greens or some sort of vegetables that have fiber in it. On one of the other portions should be about your portion of protein, which if you're really active, you could double that. And the other portion could be some sort of healthier fat. But you just want to make sure you're not overdoing anyone. And to talk about what overdoing is, like, if you have more than a couple thumb sizes of dense fat, like whether it's oil or seeds or nuts, that's a good solid portion. If you do too much of that, it's going to be more caloric dense. Whereas carbohydrates, if you're eating more than like a handful worth of whatever that is, that's going to start to be more on the extreme end. And then protein, think of that as the minimum. You want to get about that. Like, look at your palm. That is about a serving. For maybe a male, you could do 2 palm-sized portions. For a female, a single-sized portion. But if you can build your meals around that, it's going to be a really good start. And then vegetables are unlimited. I tell people, if you want to stay satisfied, make a goal of trying to eat a minimum of, it sounds extreme, but like a pound of vegetables. And you'll find that cravings will go away because you'll have all the vitamins and minerals that are micronutrients. And that will help keep you satisfied, so you'll end up eating less of the real dense proteins and fiber fats, so you're not overdoing them.
Right on. Well, we hope that kind of simplifies or, takes a massive step forward in simplifying nutrition for you. We'll go ahead and leave it right there. Nutrition is one of the pillars that we stand on with Feed Me, Fuel Me in this show. So we'll be touching on more facets and more detail elements of nutrition and cover a lot more stuff later on. But, ultimately, I really hope that, this episode does something for you and at least gives you the tools to go ahead and get started in making better choices and using food to get you where you want to go, whether it be aesthetics or performance or both.
And I'll just add one final thing. I'm going to leave a resource for a portion guide that has a visual guide that you'll see on the link for this, this podcast episode. You'll be able to see it. And just understand that, when it comes to food, it's worth experimenting with to see what works for you. Don't just try something for a couple days and say, it didn't work. You got to think that if you can master your nutrition, your energy is going to be more sustained. You can control your hormones, your sleep, and so on. So it's worth experimenting for and getting familiar and finding out what works for you, because there's not a definitive diet.
So before we get off the show, let's touch on that. How long should somebody experiment with any nutrition?
Commit, you'd say the magic number, commit to a month, but at least 3 weeks or 21 days or whatever it is. But you need to go past a couple solid weeks because it's going to take your body to, a little while to adapt to whatever you're doing. So just give it a chance. And if you don't like it and it drives you crazy, go back to normal or whatever the case. But I've worked with thousands of people, and there's so much value in just trying something out consistently. Like I said, I've had success. High fat, low carb, plant-based, this and that. It's find what works for you, and it's worth experimenting with, and I promise it's a game changer.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks, guys. See you next week.
And there you have it, crew. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, be sure to check out the full show notes and get connected with us at feedmefuelme.com. Also, be sure to subscribe to all of our information and social media on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter at feedmefuelme. We're looking forward to connecting with each and every one of you. If you found this episode inspiring in any way, please rate, comment, and subscribe so we can continue on this journey together. Also, share it with your friends on all social media, including Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter. We really appreciate you spending your time with us today and allowing us to join you on your journey. We would like to end this episode with a quote by Buddha. The secret of health for both mind and body is not to mourn for the past, not to worry about the future, or not to anticipate troubles, but to live in the present moment wisely and earnestly. Thank you for joining us today, and we will catch you on the next episode.